Good evening and welcome to this special interview edition of Tok Piksa. In the studio tonight we have with us a very special guest, a prominent, well-known and much respected PNG woman lawyer and diplomat. She has represented Papua New Guinea as ambassador to the United States, Mexico and Canada, and most recently became the first woman ever to be appointed as Secretary General to the Pacific Islands Forum. This week she is back in Port Moresby as a guest speaker at the 2015 Women's Forum, co-hosted by the U.S. Embassy in PNG and the Ministry of Religion, Youth and Community Development. She is Dame Meg Taylor. Dame Meg, thank you for joining us on Tok Piksa on this International Women's Day.
Thank you and good evening to Papua New Guinea.
Your position in the Pacific Islands Forum is a very senior one. This week you'll be speaking to a group of women at the National Forum. What will you be saying to them? And what will you be hoping that they will take away from it?
Well, I'm one of many people who will be attending this forum and as a guest speaker. I've been asked to really talk just generally about my own life's journey, my professional journey, my personal journey. And then I'm also on a panel to discuss mentoring of younger women. And the program is a very full program with very interesting people and interesting women in particular, and I'm really looking forward to spending as much time as I can at these panels and also discussing these issues of development issues for women this week. And I'm also very grateful that the US Embassy and our own Ministry of Religion and Women's Affairs have included me in this event.
Okay, as the head of the Secretariat of the Pacific Islands Forum, you've had experience now since being appointed last year about issues within the region. How does PNG differ from that, and are there any similarities?
Well, I've only actually been there a couple of months, because once I was appointed, there was a Secretary General there, and he left later last year, and I've taken over. I've been travelling to many parts of the Pacific. Covered about 10 countries at the moment, particularly spending time with the prime ministers and with the presidents. It's very interesting, our northern neighbours in Micronesia, the societies there are very strong matrilineal societies. The place of women in community but also in leadership is very important, and the respect women have. It was an eye-opener for me, and we have matrilineal societies here too, and matriarchal societies. But I think to see the participation of women at senior levels was interesting. Now, does that mean that it's easy? I think still the gender issues need to be much better balanced all over the Pacific. We don't do well, if you look at the social indicators and what happens for women in health and education, particularly here, and opportunities for our young women going through education and getting to schools. We have to do much better. We are the largest country in the region. We have a very important leadership role. We have to show that the women of this society are an important part of our community, of our leadership, of our intellectual life, of our business life and community. And we've actually, I think there's been a great effort made to make progress, but we can't be proud of the fact that all across the Pacific, the most important issue that every community talks about is the violence against women. And that is just paramount in every country that I've visited. So these are serious issues we have to deal with. But for our own country, I would say that issues that concern all of us as women is the violence against women, but health and maternal and health care for women and children, and also opportunities in education, vital for us to progress as a society.
Now, speaking of achievements, you were around during the early days of Papua New Guinea.
How early?
Well, you were an advisor to Michael Somare in his early political career. Back then, compared to today, where would you where would you see the developments in the status of women during that time, in that setting, compared to today?
Well, I mean, I wasn't really an advisor. I was much too young. But at that time, Sir Michael, when he was Chief Minister, had young people around him. Sir Rabi Namalu was Principal Private Secretary. I was Private Secretary. And then of course, there were others like Naharuni, Moyave. And we were all part of the group that were around at that time, Michael Samaria. And we had the 8-point plan. And one of the points is very much about the participation of women in political and economic life in this country. And so Michael took that very seriously as Chief Minister and as the first Prime Minister. And he pioneered the establishment of a women's office that reported to him directly. Well, eventually it was absorbed into the public service, and then I think that its power and influence diminished a bit. But there was a great enthusiasm about making sure that women were very much a part of the development of the country. And as in many societies, I think after about 15, 20 years of independence, there almost seems to be a decline in infrastructure, decline in the strength of much of the civil service, and issues around women were not as, the advocates, I don't think we were as strong as we always had hoped we would. Well, we didn't maintain the momentum, and I think there's, I read the papers about what goes on in Papua New Guinea now that I'm in Fiji, but I see a lot of progress in people taking up the gauntlet, and also young men who are very concerned about these issues, and older men too, who really want to see this country develop where we have a good partnership for development.
Dame, on your appointment to the PIF, there was a lot of criticism, a lot of feeling that Papua New Guinea didn't deserve to be appointed to that position. How do you respond to that?
Well, I respond to it by saying that Papua New Guinea has every right to hold that position. And I was nominated like any other candidate, and there were other candidates, and then the leaders of the Pacific made that decision. And yes, there was criticism that I didn't have this long history in the region, but I had national experience and I have very strong international experience. And when I was appointed, some of the leaders said to me themselves that the reason why we want you is that you will have a fresh set of eyes and you don't have any obligation to anyone else except to this region now and the position that you've been taken. People who are critical, well, I think they have to, they can answer for that themselves. The way I will respond is that I will say, you know, you measure me by the outcomes and the work that I will do over these next 3 years. And the most important piece of work we've got now is to build on the report that Sir Makere Marauta did, and that was to the implementation of a regional framework. That work that Sir Makere led on behalf of the forum leaders consulted very widely all through the Pacific with over 700 organisations. And people in the Pacific said, we want a regional organisation. But what we do want is, and Sir Makere's report makes this very clear, and he delivered this message to the leaders in Majuro in 2013, that they had to take responsibility for the decisions around the development of this region. My job is to ensure that the leaders, by the time they come to Port Moresby in September, will be delivered through a process of broader consultations that, submissions that people will make to the region to a special subcommittee representative of all the regions, all the sub-regions, I should say, of what are the priorities for this region that are political, of high political importance and high economic importance. And that decision should be made by the leaders of the Pacific, not by donor agencies and partners who come here, which they have all throughout the region, and dictate what are the development priorities for this region. That decision should be made by the leaders of the Pacific. So it will be a shift in the development paradigm, that the Pacific leaders take responsibility and make those choices. And those choices should be no more than 4 or 5 choices that will give direction to the Pacific Island Forum and all the other agencies like the SPC, SPREP, what we call the crop agencies, to implement this throughout the region, and to the multilateral banks, and to the other donors and partners that work in this region. It's a very critical time for the Pacific Island Forum, and we have to make this happen.
Besides climate change, which is an obvious pressing issue for the region, what other issues are there?
As I travel, and the issues that are raised both by leaders and people that I talk to, is connectivity is really important. That is, being connected from across the region, particularly with telecommunications, is very important. The one other is infrastructure, and the kind of infrastructure is what will enable opportunities for them in private sector development, but roads, but ports, particularly for the smaller island states, is making sure that they can get around in terms of sea vessels, etc. And fisheries. Now, when we talk about fisheries, it's a huge subject, but what is it? What is the component that people talk about a lot? And that is, what can we do to maximize the benefits of our resources for the island nations? Instead of having all the processing in different parts of the world. I mean, Papua New Guinea's doing a lot in that and having our processing facilities here. But the question for the issue for us, and this is for the Ministry for Fisheries and the Ministry for Trade, and I know that they're addressing it, is how can we maximize that to ensure that we are getting the maximum benefits of this. So these are 3 things that have come out. The other one would be capacity. What is the capacity of Pacific Islanders? What is in some of the countries you go to, you have a lot of their population don't live in their countries. They're living in the United States, they live in New Zealand, they live in Australia. But in Papua New Guinea, most of us live in our own countries. But what is the capacity of our communities, our young people, to be educated for the future? So these are some of the issues that people talk to me about.
Mm-hmm. Do the other Pacific countries look towards PNG as the biggest country in the Pacific to take the lead in certain areas, and what would those areas be?
Well, they do look towards Papua New Guinea, but it's very interesting when they hear from Papua New Guinea that everybody thinks that we're all rolling in money, and the immediate comment is, "Oh, you people have a lot of gas and a lot of resources," and I say, yes, we do, but we have challenges just like you do, like these countries do, and that is, how do we plan our development so that the benefits of the resource development is then put into our communities. And I often talk to them about the challenges we have in terms of just basic infrastructure, because we are a big country. We have terrain that many of these countries don't know. I mean, when I first went to Republic of Marshall Islands, we landed and the highest point is a little bridge to cross, and I had to get used to the fact that there was nothing else around me except just water. And I was not comfortable in the beginning, but people from our outer islands here in Papua New Guinea know that feeling, but I'm from the highlands, so it was a bit daunting. But they do look to us in terms of leadership in the Pacific, but the political leadership and what positions we take on certain issues, that attention is paid on that. Sensitive political issues, particularly right now, one of the issues is around our brothers and sisters in West Papua. That is a conversation that you hear particularly amongst the young people, and they want to know, what is Papua New Guinea's decision? What is Papua New Guinea going to do in terms of Melanesian Spearhead Group, these kinds of issues? Well, our institutions that have invested in Fiji and now in Samoa, some of our Papua New Guinea companies like the Lamana Group, our superannuation funds, etc., also MRDC in Fiji, that has had an impact. And BSP, of course, is seen as people are very excited about that and are in awe of it, I think. And so I'm very proud to see the Papua New Guinea flag fly, but I fly the flag for all the Pacific nations.
Your position in the Pacific is an important one, obviously. Most of how you're dealing with issues comes back to your own personal life and history. Could you just share with us where you draw from and what events in your past and your upbringing that you draw on?
Well, I was very fortunate to have very loving parents and family, and my natural sister. But then I have there were five of us. Others that were relatives that were raised by my parents, but I was fortunate to have that kind of life in the Highlands, where tremendous support from my parents, but also a deep love for my tribal grandparents from Jiwaka. I think what helps me function the way I do is I am very comfortable about who I am because of where I come from, and I come from Papua New Guinea. But I am very proud of the fact that I am also from the Highlands, and I've always been extremely proud of that. And knowing my home, knowing my relatives, but knowing my community, knowing the issues there, I'm also very proud of the fact that I grew up in a place like Goroka, where not my native tongue, but people who embraced my father and mother, and where my parents are now buried. All those things are very important about who you are. I don't pretend to be something that I'm not. And all those years in the United States, when I also worked at as the head of accountability for the private sector side of the World Bank, I think that kept me very much on a track where when I did meet with indigenous people in Latin America, the peoples in East and West Africa, I took them for who they were, and they took me for who I was. I'm not fussed about airs and graces. Yeah.
It was much simpler to understand.
Yeah, easy. Yeah.
Okay. And now, besides your professional achievements, you've also had some notable sporting achievements.
When I was trim, taut, and trim.
And so you took part in the 1971 South Pacific Games.
Yes.
In French Polynesia, and you participated in the pentathlon.
I did.
That's 5 events in one, isn't it?
Yes.
And you won the silver medal.
Yes, I missed the goal by 3 points because that you scored. And the interesting thing is the Fijian woman who won the gold, she lives in Paris now. I think she ended up living in New Caledonia and lives in Paris, and we communicate and we keep in touch on many things, particularly around on issues for the Pacific and for issues in New Caledonia and Vanuatu or Melanesia. Yeah.
Well, this is the year of the Pacific Games here in PNG, and 1971. How patriotic was it for you?
Well, I was a student at UPNG at that time, and we didn't have a lot of money behind the team at that time, but everybody put in what they could. We used to get special protein biscuits just to help supplement the diet, because many of us were students living at that time what we call ADCOL, and at UPNG. So, of course, it was patriotic. You know, we were. It was a tremendous adventure for us too, and to go all the way to Tahiti, and we did very well as a group, Papua New Guinea. Yeah, but it seems so far off. But the other thing I have done since then is I ran the New York Marathon.
What was that like?
That was great, but now I have a bad knee, so I don't run like I used to. Yeah.
And you were also part of the 4x100 meter relay in those games?
And we won a medal too. Yep.
Right, that was a bronze medal?
We won a bronze.
Okay.
Yep.
And from your point of view, the young crop of athletes we have this year, there's been a lot of positive energy about what they can accomplish. What is it like? What's your opinion of how well we can do in this year's games?
I have to be honest, I don't know all the athletes that are in there, but from my understanding is that we do have a very strong field. I just think that they're passionate about what they do. They'll go in and do their best, and we've just got to get behind them and support them. But I also know that in Fiji, they're doing the same. People are getting ready for the games. There's a lot of excitement in the Pacific, actually. People talk about the games. So I probably won't be here, but I'll be watching on the television in Fiji or wherever I am in the Pacific. And I wish all the athletes from Papua New Guinea all the very best. But I think the most wonderful part of it all is the friendships that you make and the people you still keep in touch with. How many years later, and I'm still keeping in touch with people that I ran with.
You're focused on the region right now.
I am.
But where do you see us moving to in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's tremendous opportunity. I mean, there's no other country in the Pacific that has the opportunities that we have. But there's no other country in the Pacific that has the complexities that we have. And I think we all know that. You know, we've got the diversity of our languages, the diversity of our tribal communities, but the tremendous opportunity that we've been given to have resources that we can develop for the future. I think our biggest challenge is how we're going to utilize that for the development, and being very focused on, first of all, there are issues of population growth. That's important. I mean, I think the number of people that we have and how we're going to look after those people, particularly in the social sectors of health, education, but primarily we've got to focus on the development of our infrastructure so that our people who are resourceful and farmers can get their products to markets. But one of the biggest challenges we've got is that we don't have sufficient energy supply, particularly, you know, as I refer to electricity, so that when you want to create industry or create businesses, you don't have power sources. And the ones that we do have, we have constant power cuts and difficulties with. But we've got to start focusing and putting our resources into building the structures that are going to be very important so our people can look after themselves. And they will look after themselves. You see it in communities now, and you see it with women now getting into small businesses. You see in agriculture. But I think having all the resources that we have can make us very lazy and just hope that all this will just keep going and we will live off it. Well, we won't. It won't last. It just won't last, and we've just got to be much more definitive about how we utilize our mineral resources and our gas resources, but particularly about the renewable resources, fisheries and forests. I have to be optimistic, because I think if we're not optimistic, then we're in a depression the whole time about it. But I meet wonderful young people and a lot of vibrant young women with such energy, but that are smart and who want a future for this country and for themselves, and to be involved and to participate. And when I finish in my term in at the forum. I hope that I'll be able to come back and make a stronger contribution here. But I can do that while I'm there too, I know that.
Dame Meg Taylor, on those words, thank you very much
you.
for time on Tok Piksa.
Thanks very much. Thank you.